Vaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Darati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamstra Shri Rupam Saгаjatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamstra Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasudi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna everyone. So welcome to our study. So we've been discussing this yoga ladder and discussing how knowledge is one of the determinants of where we are in this yoga ladder. So chapter 4 is established as titled as transcendental knowledge. So this chapter is about how to take transcendental knowledge and apply it to our activities, to take jnana to our karma. We're all acting in so many different ways, but do we know how to act in a way that will benefit us? We've learned through societal conditioning to try to acquire so many material positions and situations, but is that the best way to work? So this is what we are trying to inquire, and Krishna is telling us to work with knowledge, so that we have to work knowing who is the real doer, who is this supreme controller, and then we can work intelligently. And what is the intelligent way to work? To work in a detached manner. So we know that we work knowing that we are not independent. We are fully dependent on the Supreme Lord. When we do this work in this way, then there'll be no bondage. And then we'll know what is real action and what is inaction. That we'll know very clearly, which Krishna has said is not so easy to understand. Even the intelligent struggle to understand this, right? And we'll see at the end of this section, but it really is beginning in the next section, that to get this knowledge, one must approach a bona fide spiritual master. And so when we work in this way, our knowledge will increase, work in this detached manner, and we'll begin to see ourselves as spirit, soul, part and parcel, and fully detach, become transcendental, sit on a higher platform, and thus achieve perfection, great happiness. And this is the goal of all work. We only work to acquire some happiness. And so Krishna is saying, you work now with transcendental knowledge. Then you'll achieve the greatest of all happiness. And of course, the greatest of all happiness is achieved in attaining the Supreme. And our activities will become very, very clear. So this is what Krishna is leading us to in this section, or in this chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So we'll start from verse 20 today, and we'll continue up to verse 33. So verse 20 reads, abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. So Krishna has spoke, if you remember in the 18th verse, about one who sees action in inaction, and inaction in action to be one who understands, very intelligent among men. So now Krishna is explaining in 20 the position of the sadhaka, the person who is trying to purify. And they understand that one in full knowledge works. Right? So what is the only way to be free of bondage? It is to be Krishna conscious. Srila Prabhupada speaks in the purport that all other activity, even the Vedic sacrifices of karma kanda, they will lead to more birth, more death, more old age and disease, because there will be results that one must come and take. So detached work is the only way to become free of bondage, and this means to work for Krishna. Then there is no reactions, and thus we have inaction in action. Though we are working, no reactions. So some important aspects of this verse, number 20. The first is ever satisfied. So this is our goal, right? We all want to be fully satisfied. And when one is acting in Krishna consciousness, then how can there be any dissatisfaction? Krishna is the source of all happiness. He is the source of all the rasas. All things that are pleasurable in the material world and the spiritual world, they come from Krishna. So if one is working with Krishna fully, then one is by definition must be ever satisfied, because he is the source of all happiness. The material world is full of so much misery, and when one gives it up, that misery is also given up. This is a very simple formula. So we see this noted. Then we see that is independent. So what does this independent mean? Does it mean we're independent of Krishna? No, that is our foolishness. We think we're independent of Krishna. What this independent means is that one is independent of material outcomes. One's happiness, their satisfaction, is independent of whatever material circumstance we may be in. Whether we are rich or poor, whether we are healthy or sick, whether we are, inside or outside. One's happiness, one's satisfaction is independent of any material circumstance. And one is not dependent on anyone but Krishna. So they have independence from all material circumstances. Whether chapatis are there or not, one is ever satisfied. So he does work, but he does not attach to the result, because he is completely free from all the material circumstances. And he thus has no worries. And Srila Prabhupada would give the example, or the analogy of the son of a king. He does not have any concerns. Doesn't lament if he loses his toy. Oh, another toy will come. He's not at all worried, because he is dependent on Krishna, and he has no sense of independence. He's not worried, because he has someone who can provide everything for him. So the devotees, when they take shelter of Krishna, they have no worry about any other maintenance, no fear, no worried about this, that, or the other. Simply serving Krishna, knowing that they have a relationship with the unlimited, all-loving Supreme Personality of Godhead, who protects one in all circumstances. And thus, one becomes this very liberated feeling. It's actually a very freeing consciousness. Because now, it doesn't matter. Even COVID-19, no worry. This is one's position is ever satisfied, independent of all material outcomes. Because we have Krishna on our side. What else one could need? Right? And in that way, one is engaged in all kinds of undertakings. So the third aspect of this verse, engaged in all kinds of undertakings. So, we talked about one cannot be reactionless just by trying to do no activity, by inaction. That's impossible. Still, in trying to be inactive, one must eat, one must move around a little bit, someone must breathe, and in all those activities, there is reactions, unless one is working for Krishna. As I said in the very beginning, it is the only way to be free of bondage. So here, we see though, one remains very active in all kinds of activities. So it is not about giving up action, but it is about giving up attachment to the fruits. And this is the key recommendation. And thus the devotee is very active, working for Krishna, not sitting idle or being lazy, as we have heard. So this verse, as I mentioned, is discussing the position of the sadhaka. Now in verse 21 and 22, we'll see the perfection of this consciousness. So verse 21. Such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reaction. So this man of understanding has knowledge. Right? He understands everything clearly. So when we know we are part and parcel of Krishna, then it becomes very easy to serve Krishna. Right? And Srila Prabhupada gives the examples here of the part of the machine. The part always serves the whole. Right? So as long as I know I am part of Krishna, then it's very easy. Right? And in this way, what happens? One becomes immune from all reactions to work. We're all looking for immunity right now. But the real immunity we should be searching for is immunity from the reactions of all work, which is only going to create bondage. So in knowledge, one knows how to become free, right, from all of the sinful reactions. Thus working, he is not affected by any of the reactions. So this is the intelligence way to work. And we see very importantly here that such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled. Why controlling the mind and intelligence? To avoid the enemy of lust. Remember, where does lust take its residence? In the senses, the mind, and intelligence. So if one has controlled the mind through good intelligence, then automatically the senses will be controlled and lust will not manifest, and thus that lust will not destroy our knowledge. This knowledge that is teaching us how to work for the greatest benefit. So Krishna is saying and describing that one must have the mind and intelligence controlled. Of course, we know how best to control that. That is through the practice of devotional service, not through any artificial means of control. Then we see in this verse, acts only for the bare necessities of life. This concept Prabhupada spoke about so much. Simple living, high thinking. We see in Nectar of Instruction, Atyahara prayasascha. One should avoid atyahara, over consuming or over endeavor. Right? Both pratyahara and atyahara. Prayasas and atyahara. Those should be avoided. Right? So one doesn't waste time accumulating material possessions. They use their time very wisely in serving Krishna. Whatever Krishna gives. Ishavasyamidam sarvam yat kincha jigat tena taktena bunjitaha. This tena taktena, one has a quota. Whatever Krishna gives, one is satisfied. So Krishna is providing food and shelter to all living entities, including the birds and beasts and giant elephants. So of course for us as well, he'll provide. Right? So doesn't mean one ignores the body though. One must maintain the body. Right? As Prabhupada says, the machine needs some oil. The part on the machine needs some oil. Right? In order for it to function properly to serve the whole. So the purpose of maintaining the part is to allow for the function of the whole. So the living entity, the human with knowledge knows, no, I maintain this body because it is a vehicle to serve Krishna. It is a vehicle to perform detached work for the pleasure of Krishna. So there is maintenance. And this person does not waste time trying to claim any ownership. As Krishna says, gives up all sense of proprietorship. Because to think we own anything is working against the actual reality. It's like trying to figure out how to be free from the law of gravity on this planet Earth. It can't work. It can't happen. It is a universal law. So our attempt to possess material things is never going to happen because Krishna is the proprietor. So it's very difficult to give up this sense of proprietorship. And what does it take? A very humble disposition. To give up the sense of proprietorship, seeing Krishna as the real doer, as the real owner, and the real enjoyer, takes a humble position. But when we do, it is a very liberating position. One becomes ever satisfied. One becomes free of all the ups and downs of material turmoil. So this fully detached action is key. But our ego often gets in the way of this perspective. Right? So depending on Krishna is so much more pleasurable than depending on ourselves. Krishna is unlimited. He is perfect. He never fails. We are always failing. And so to depend on him is much better than to even depend on ourselves. So how to become detached then from this matter? When we intensify our desire to serve Krishna. When we are fully in knowledge serving Krishna, then all the material hankerings naturally dissipate. One doesn't have to artificially detach from matter. By attaching to Krishna, one naturally detaches from matter. It happens time and time again. And so when one does, then one has no time to even think about material activities because one is so engaged and so satisfied in their Krishna consciousness. Once we are satisfied in some activity, we don't go anywhere else. Okay? Why, when we are doing some activity and we go and look on our phone? Because we're not engaged and satisfied in that activity. So we're looking for something else. Right? We are distracted. But we know there have been times, maybe you're watching some, film or something, at least materially speaking, and we're so engrossed, we lose all sense of surroundings. Well, when one becomes Krishna conscious, one becomes so absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, and it is so pleasing and so satisfying. No material, you could walk by $1 billion sitting on the street and think, no, I'm going to see my Radha Kunj Vihari. It doesn't even register. That is the consciousness. No one? Because I just need some basic necessities. Now, real intelligence, let me take that $1 billion and go serve Krishna, of course, and build him a golden temple, but just speaking figuratively. Okay? So the piece in Borijan Prabhu in his lecture on this verse gives a very wonderful description of humility. This humility is the key to giving up this sense of false proprietorship. We say we are insignificant sparks, tiny sparks. That is easy to say, but sometimes difficult to apply. Okay? And he gives a wonderful example. We say we are insignificant servants. Then how we can have such big problems? If we're so insignificant, then how we can have big problems? The ant doesn't have really big problems, yet we concoct all these giant things. Right? So when one is humble, actually nothing affects us. We become hurt by so many things due to our ego. I should have been acknowledged this way. Somebody spoke to me, incorrectly, or this happened. But think, when you're humble, no problems. Certainly with anybody else. There are no conflicts with anybody. They only arise when there's a presence of ego. So taking a humble position is actually very, again, liberating. So by understanding this, we can try to apply that. And when we feel trouble, we should analyze, am I really being humble? If our feelings become hurt by some interactions or some circumstance, it should be a telltale sign. Just like if my temperature rises, it's a sign there's something going on in my body. If my consciousness becomes agitated, if we look back and just see, is there ego involved? More than likely, we'll find the presence of ego in that situation. But as soon as we remove ego from that situation, peace and happiness. And nobody knows this better than husband and wife. When husband and wife interact with each other, why there's Kurukshetra? I am important. No, I am important. And there is Kurukshetra. But as soon as both approach that relationship with no ego, things become very fixable. Whatever small inconvenience happened, it becomes fixable. Right? So this ego is the key, and the lack of being humble is the key to finding this really wonderful position, and certainly to become free of the sense of proprietorship. It only happens when there's humility. Okay? 22. He who is satisfied with gain which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled, although performing actions. So we see this idea of duality. What is duality? Hot and cold, rich and poor, tall and short. The material world is full of duality. Everything we measure is relative to something else. When we say rich, what does that mean? It just means rich relative to somebody else. If I have 10 gold coins, I don't have any idea what that means unless I compare it to somebody else who has 3 gold coins. So everything is relative, thus we have duality. But in the spiritual world, everything is perfect. There is no two sides of the coin. There is no hot and cold. It is just perfect. There is no tall and short. Everything is just perfect. So there is there is variety. There is great variety, but there is no perception of better or worse, because everything is absolute and perfect. So this duality does not exist. In the material world, there is always duality. Some things are better than others. And what are we doing? Our whole life, materially, we are looking to try to find the best of what is available. But in the spiritual world, there is no finding. Whatever we do, it is absolutely perfect. And it is such a sweet experience. But this only exists in the spiritual world. So the mood of the devotee in their material activities is satisfied with gains which comes of its own accord. If results come, okay. If they don't come, no worries, no lamenting, no duality. Why? The results are Krishna's. They're not ours. So one doesn't have to endeavor so much. In Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 11th canto, we have the example of the python. And this comes in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And the example is given of the python. The python maintains one's body by whatever comes to it. It eats not by going out and searching, just whatever comes to it. It will honor that food. So that example is given of the wise person who does not overly endeavor when it takes whatever comes. The example of Madhavendra Puri was not going out and even begging milk. And who came and gave him milk? The most beautiful cowherd boy he had ever seen. Lord Krishna himself. This mood of surrender was so attractive to Krishna that Krishna himself came and said, nobody in my village goes hungry. Madhavendra Puri was shocked how this boy knew I had not eaten yet. Of course, the all-knowing Supreme Lord came. So when one sees like this, one actually controls their own happiness. Let me make that statement again. When one understands this, one actually controls their own happiness. Because the happiness is not coming from the results. That they can't control. The happiness is coming from the service. And that they have some control over. So they don't care about the result. They just want to be engaged in the service. And thus there is no chance for dissatisfaction or satisfaction. You know, when we spend months planning a wedding, we work so hard and so many meetings and all the details are put in place and this plan and that plan and it. And then when something goes wrong, what happens? We become so frustrated. But in Krishna consciousness, the devotee doesn't care about the results. They're only concerned about the effort. Did I do my best? Did I put forth the best effort I could? So whether success or failure, whose is that? That's Krishna's. If Krishna wanted it to be successful, it would have been. And if he didn't, it wasn't. And whose definition of success matters? Ours or Krishna? It's Krishna's definition that matters. So the devotee, when they have this knowledge of who is the doer, who is the proprietor, who am I, who is Krishna, then they're always in bliss. And one actually controls their state of mind. So they are steady in both success and in failure. Right? And actually happy. So one must have faith in Krishna, being the supreme controller. Because if everything happens by his will, and we have faith in this, then why would anybody would worry? Wait a minute, this is what Krishna wants. So it must be best. He is all loving. We can't change it anyways, so why bother trying? Just put forth our effort. Be an instrument in Krishna's plan. Thus Krishna says, Vigato Jara. Don't be lethargic, thinking you are not the doer, you are not the proprietor. No, whatever ability we have, use it in the service of Krishna. And it is such a liberating realization. It frees one from all the entanglements. Even in devotional service, we develop this attachment to the results. And it leads to our ups and downs. One, we don't become steady. Sometimes we are very enthusiastic to serve because of this circumstances there, or this person's not there, and so now I can serve, or this situation. We put all these conditions on our enthusiasm because we are looking for something selfishly. But if we're just looking for the pleasure of Krishna, whatever is there, whatever circumstance, whatever even my service, I am happy, glad that Krishna is enabling my body to render that service, and grateful. That is the mood. It's so liberating. And thus Srila Prabhupada says at the end of this purport, I wanted to read the last two lines. Therefore, he is steady both in success and in failure. These signs are visible when one is fully in transcendental knowledge. So this is the sign of having knowledge. And Srila Prabhupada, we see, he had so many setbacks, so many of his, so many plans went to different directions. But Prabhupada never for a millisecond veered off his path of determination. He was steady throughout. Whether there was great success, he did not get, oh, okay, now everything's done. To the last days on his deathbed, he's translating Srimad Bhagavatam. He had accomplished more than anyone had ever accomplished. Yet, he remained steady. Right? And so, why? Because he had this knowledge. So this knowledge is so critical to our ability to work in this way that we are describing. It is so important. Because when we have it, we achieve this great liberated state of mind. 23. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. So the work now of one who is full of knowledge and unattached to the modes is fully in transcendence. What does transcendence mean? Above the modes of nature. They are not at all disturbed by anything happening, what we have been talking about. So one is in full knowledge can achieve this, right? Completely free from any contamination of the mode. Works, but totally unattached and unmoved. And this happens when we have knowledge. And thus one becomes fully situated in this knowledge. So now Krishna is going to speak about many sacrifices coming up and how to acquire this transcendental knowledge. So we see that knowledge is really critical to achieving this state of consciousness. How many of us want to be like this? Unagitated in all times, steady in success and failure, free from all kinds of bondage, ever satisfied. Right? These are all things that we are looking for. So how to get it? With this knowledge. So Krishna is going to speak about some different types of knowledge and sacrifices coming up in a few verses. But first, he's going to talk about how to merge into this transcendence. Okay? So 24. A person who's fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So what is the result of working fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness? Now we get the result. Attaining the spiritual kingdom, where there is no duality, where there is no misery. So this is the fruit. And why does this come? Because one is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness. His full contribution to spiritual activities. So his entire set of activities, his karma, all his actions are centered on Krishna. Everything is done as a sacrifice for Krishna. And the result? There are no results. No material results. And only spiritual results. So no more karma, good or bad, to come back and receive. The karma accounts go to zero. Pack up bags and go back home where we came from. So this is the result. So, but one must sacrifice for Krishna in order to achieve this, right? In order to achieve this purification from this material contamination. So Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada says, is the process to get a conditioned soul out of the binds of the material world. It is the only answer. The materially absorbed person can be cured by devotional service. And the more we do in Krishna consciousness, the more the veil of Maya will be lifted from our vision. We can overcome the power of Maya by the mercy of Krishna. Ye tamam prapadyante. To the degree we surrender to Krishna, to that degree he will remove the influence of Maya, which creates the idea of proprietorship. So this is the key in this section. How to apply knowledge to our actions. How to do work. Work in a way that will not bind us, but instead take one to the spiritual kingdom where one can render service to Krishna unlimitedly. And avoid all of the reactions of the work, the fruits that we so-called want. So now we'll talk about these different yagyas. 9 verses are going to explain the sacrifices of the sacrifices that lead to transcendental knowledge. And then Krishna is going to say which is the best of those sacrifices. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them. And some offer in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So Krishna has explained already now the devotee of Krishna and how they do sacrifice, right? How they are working everything for the pleasure of Krishna, that is sacrifice. Now we're seeing some other types of yogis who are doing different types of sacrifice. Right? Not necessarily all yogis. Some of the karmakandis are not considered part of yoga because the goal is not to link, but we can say they are still doing sacrifice. Right? So this is now in verse 25. We're not speaking about the Nishkam Karma Yoga. The goal of these sacrifice is to acquire some sort of material result or some desire. Right? So But the ultimate goal of all of these sacrifices is to acquire this transcendental knowledge. But they have some interim objective. So factually, all yajna must be done for the pleasure of Vishnu. That's why he says, Bhoktaram yajna tapasam. I'm the beneficiary of all yajna. But we see some interim goals in this yajna. Right? Either the demigods or the sacrifice into the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So there are two types of yajna. One can sacrifice their material possessions, and one can do sacrifice in the pursuit of knowledge. So devotees will sacrifice all the worldly possessions, their material possessions, in the service of Krishna. The materialists will sacrifice some of their possessions to the demigods to get something back in return. Right? So sacrifice some possessions to get more in return. The devotee sacrifices everything in to get in what return? Love of Krishna. The others sacrifice their own identity to try to merge into the Brahman. So there are two types. One sacrifices material possessions, one sacrifices their own identity. Right? And the devotee, again, sacrifices everything for Krishna's pleasure. And sacrifice to Krishna is not to gain something, but only to see Krishna happy. So the devotee doesn't sacrifice to Krishna just to become free of birth, death, old age, and disease. No, the devotee sacrifices for Krishna only to see Krishna happy. And when one renders service in that way, actually the happiness is forced upon the devotee, even though that is not the goal of their yajna. But the goal of these yajnas have some alter mean. But again, ultimately it will elevate one to transcendental knowledge. 26. Some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control. And others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the object of the senses in the fire of the senses. So we see here some varnashram sacrifices. All members of society are meant to do yajna. Nobody is free of that. And we'll see why in a few verses. So the Brahmana sacrifices what they hear to only hear about Krishna. They restrict all of their senses to only be engaged in Krishna. So there is some sacrifice. The Grihastas sacrifice their material desires by restricting them. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of restricted sex life. One restricts within the confines of marriage. Right? So that is a type of sacrifice that we see. 27. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses offer the functions of all the senses and the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. So this sacrifice of pushing the life bearers upwards, it is to purify of material contamination. By controlling the air, one can control the mind, which can then control the senses. So this is all within this Ashtanga Yoga process that Krishna will more fully describe in chapter 6. Verse 28. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So we have 4 more types of sacrifice described here. Again, all of them are meant to acquire knowledge. Knowledge that will lead one to serve Krishna. Right? So many yoga systems are being presented here, and they provide some material benefits. And this is to provide a means for gradual elevation. For those who are not ready to work fully for Krishna's happiness, there are some of these different processes that will yield some material benefit, but also progress one towards complete transcendental knowledge. So these are not the same as Krishna consciousness. We should not confuse this with Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness cannot be obtained by these sacrifices. Bhakti can be attained only by the mercy of Krishna and his devotees. So we should not think that by doing these yajnas one can achieve bhakti. That is not correct. One can achieve bhakti only by the mercy of Krishna and his pure devotees. And thus Krishna is going to tell us in the 34th verse how to achieve it. 29. Still others who are inclined to this process of breath restraint, to remain in trance, practicing by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming, and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as sacrifice. So again, this is the pranayam. The pranayam is part of the Ashtanga process, to control the senses. Right? So, but the devotee has already controlled the senses by engaging in Krishna consciousness. Right? So sense control must be there. The only question is how. What is the best way? It is so much easier to control the senses by engaging them in a very sweet and fulfilling activity. More difficult to just restrict the senses without engagement. So this pranayam is one of these processes to control. And Prabhupada talks about, the breathing, and it can extend the life. Because the lifespan for us is not determined in time, it is determined in number of breaths. So through this process, one can extend the life by limiting the breathing, limiting the number of breaths, and thus one can have more time, not to enjoy the senses, but to pursue self-realization. Okay. Now the final 4 verses. Verse 30. All these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted the nectar results of sacrifice, they advance towards the supreme eternal atmosphere. So here, depending on this type of sacrifice, one gets a particular result. But the commonality of all of these practices is to control the senses. Because by controlling the senses, one avoids sinful life, and thus avoids sinful reactions, and then can avoid suffering. Right? We know from sin leads to reaction, leads to suffering. So we see this sense control in all of these different processes. Right? But the ultimate goal is, as Krishna says here, progressing, advancing towards Krishna consciousness. Not just to become free of sins. Because if I become free of sins, but I'm not progressing towards Krishna, what am I going to do? Sin again. So then what is the purpose of that sacrifice? Right? And here we see that there are different, gains from the sacrifice. Right? So there is a motive. And the system is set up that one can enjoy some material benefits while making progress towards spiritual life. And that is the benefit of this type of regulated enjoyment, because it allows one to continue forward and not become completely entangled. 31. O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? So here we see why we must do sacrifice. No way to be happy without sacrifice. Right? A thief is always punished. And when punishment comes, unhappiness. So if we don't offer the results of our work, we are guaranteed suffering because we are not the proprietor. So society is trying to enjoy all the things in the material world, but not understanding who is the owner. And thus they are doing no sacrifice. And thus we see such pervasive suffering. This is the reason. Right? So ignorance of who we are and who is Krishna is the cause of sinful life. When we don't know we are part and parcel of Krishna, we try to enjoy independently. And thus we steal from Krishna. And that leads to this suffering. Right? So Krishna is saying here, one can then never be happy, because one will be constantly confronted with all the reactions of this sinful life. Right? And that sinful activity leads to next birth. Why? Because I have reactions now, I have to come back and take. I'm filling my karma account with so many activities, doing it in an attached way, and thus I cycle birth and death, birth and death. So the human form of life
is a way to break this cycle. And these yagyas are meant to satisfy those sense desires in some way, the dharma, artha, kama, but ultimately progress towards Krishna. And that is the nice system Krishna has established. Yeah, you can get some of your desires fulfilled, but don't lose sight and keep towards Krishna consciousness. Of course, this is a secondary approach recommended. The first approach is just go straight to Krishna consciousness. It's so much sweeter than whatever material rewards you may get from these yagyas, and there's no risk of becoming entangled. So Krishna consciousness is the ultimate solution to all problems, and these are interim yagyas towards that goal. Right? But the only way to break again this loophole of sin and reaction is by knowledge. Ignorance, avidya, is the root cause of our sinful life. So we keep coming back to this transcendental knowledge. 32. All of these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will become liberated. So all these different types of sacrifices to meet the different positions one may be in. Depending on where you are in the modes of nature, there is a sacrifice you can perform to begin your process of upliftment. Anyone can do this. Okay? And one is allowed to work with their body and mind and intelligence. There is so much attachment to the body. So Krishna is enabling one to work with this attachment and still make progress. It is a sweet blessing. And all of these sacrifices are approved by the Vedas, meaning we cannot concoct or make up our own types of yajna, as such foolish people do. No, these yajnas that work must be enjoined in the Vedas, because Krishna is the ultimate determinant of what should be done and what cannot be done. And again, what is the end goal of all these yajnas? Transcendental knowledge that will bring one to Krishna consciousness, because this knowledge is the key. Right? So now the 33rd verse, the last verse. O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possessions. After all, O son of Pritha, all sacrifices work culminate in transcendental knowledge. So now we get, after explaining all these different types of sacrifices, Krishna says now, what is the best type of sacrifice? One that sacrifices in knowledge. Knowledge of who I am and who is Krishna. Because when I do yajna for some material boon, it means I don't yet know. Why am I trying to enjoy separate from Krishna? I am his part and parcel. So I'm missing that knowledge. But yajna done with that knowledge is the most complete. So when we have complete knowledge, I just put the sequence of verses here, that when we have complete knowledge of what to do that will be best for me, then I become free of all miseries, because I work in the detached manner. There's no attachment, because even in those prior yajnas, there's some attachment to some mystic siddhis, some material opulences, something there is there. But when I have complete knowledge, I know, fully free from all material desires. And thus I work in a fully detached way. And when I work in detached way like this, I'm engaging in devotional service. And what is the result of engaging in devotional service? Unlimited eternal happiness, beyond compare of what any other yajna can provide. Okay? And Krishna will conclude this section of Bhagavad Gita, the 6th chapter, with that statement. Right? So one does sacrifice based on their level of faith. When I have faith in Krishna, knowledge of Krishna, then my sacrifice becomes for his pleasure. This is the most beneficial. More beneficial than just sacrificing some material possessions for some material gain. Right? The material desires in yajna are done according to the level of my knowledge and faith. But if I know there's a better opportunity, then of course I'll come to a higher level. So Krishna is establishing what is the ultimate. All sacrifices work of work culminate in transcendental knowledge. So this is the goal. The goal of the karma kanda process is to elevate to the point. The goal of pranayam is to elevate. The goal of all of these different is to elevate to bhakti, to devotional service, in full knowledge. And where real knowledge ends is the performance of bhakti. And we see this sambandha abhideya prayojana, right? When I know my sambandha, my relationship with Krishna, it leads one to act in that relationship. Abhideya. And by acting in that relationship, one achieves the goal, love of God, the prayojana. Right? So it starts with knowing that relationship. So knowledge is the power. And thus this transcendental knowledge of Krishna should bring us to the highest action, devotional service. Because it yields the ultimate of all results. All happiness, no side effects, no duality, ever satisfied, fully independent of all the modes, as we've been discussing in this section. Right? So this is this section. Now Krishna is going to give the direct instruction in the very next verse. We have conclusive understanding. Transcendental knowledge is the key to my success. The key to my success. Where to get it and how to find it. And he's going to say, approach the spiritual master. Tadvidi paripatena paripashtena sevaya. Right? So render service to the Guru. Inquire to him. Right? And because he has seen the truth, tattva darshina, he can reveal it to you. So this important statement will be made in the next verse. And the remainder of this chapter, Krishna is going to glorify the position and the results of transcendental knowledge. Very sweet verses, the last 9 verses of this chapter. So this is the process of yagyas, bringing one to ultimately transcendental knowledge. So we started this section today with the discussion of what one in Krishna consciousness has, very beautiful and wonderful, liberating perspective, and how some lower or interim levels of yagya can bring one to that position. Okay? So that's today's discussion. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Any comments or discussion today? Questions?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Thank you so much for the wonderful class, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, in 428 you said that 4 more types of yajnas. Are those the one which you mentioned in 433, Prabhuji? The complete knowledge, detached work, engaged in bhakti and unlimited eternal bliss?
No, sorry. So in 28, these are the types of intermediary types of yagya. By performing the severe austerities, by doing this yoga for the eightfold mysticisms, by studying the Vedas, these are different types of yagyas that are, again, leading to the point of bhakti. So these are different types of yagyas, and Srila Prabhupada explains them in the purport. One can take some strict austerity. Right? When we follow austerity, we are sacrificing something, right? Our comforts, some activity. So, but Prabhupada describes in that purport that, the ultimate austerity is the austerity for Krishna. Right? So those are distinct. There are just 4 more types of yagya.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I just have a question from actually last week's class.
Yes.
Prabhuji, I don't know if anybody asked this question or if I myself asked it, I can't remember. Good, but Prabhuji, can you please explain this phrase, inaction versus action in inaction?
Yes. Yeah, it's a bit of a riddle, right? Yeah, so let's take each of them separately. Inaction, inaction, right? So we have 2 words, inaction and action. So one who can see that there's inactivity while doing activity. That is intelligent. So how do we have inaction and action? It means one works without reaction. So I'm doing activity, but there's no reactions. How does that happen? Detaching to Krishna. Right? When I detach from the result, there is inaction, meaning no result, inactivity, inaction.
Right.
Now, action in inaction means, but if I don't have knowledge, I think I'm just not going to work. But in actuality, there's still reactions from so-called inactivity. So there is action in inaction because I still have to breathe. I have to eat. There are living entities. Fruits and vegetables are also living entities. I'm going to walk and I may step on some living entity. I have to wear clothing. So in so-called inactivity, there is still action. That means there is results. There's karma. And so I have to come back and take it. So there's actually reactions in so-called inactivity because I'm not working for Krishna. So one who can see this distinction, because sometimes we see somebody working really, really hard and going to the office and doing this, one may see, oh no, there's great, reactions for that. But no, if their consciousness is to serve Krishna, then there's actually inaction in that activity. But somebody sitting idle, we may think, wow, they're creating no reactions. But if they're not in Krishna consciousness, actually sitting idle, they're still creating reactions. So there is action in that inaction. So, is that okay?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. That is a riddle of Krishna.
But it's a very nice phrase, so it's like
It is.
just to explain to somebody. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you for the nice question. Any other questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Dandavats.
Prabhu, I have the question is kind of doubt whether I am able to put the question properly or not.
No problem. Just
So the doubt is that now the situation is that lockdown situation and government has put a lot of effort and a lot of frontline people like their medical, they are so much doing effort. In all these conditions, there is a lot of restrictions, and if one in this blind phase is like he says that okay, my Lord will protect me, kind of my Allah will protect me, and go. I don't care all this medicine, I don't care all these things. So, kind of if we cross the limit of the state, that means we are not following the state law. We are not following the basic rules, which actually affects a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Like in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sorry, I might not phrase my question properly, but
Yeah.
this is the kind of doubt. We need to respect the state also. We need to respect the people around us also. Then now think of our faith also.
Yeah. So it's a nice question because one can misconstrue the understanding that Krishna is my protector. So one doesn't put themselves in harm's way. Why? Because one does not want to take service from Krishna. So one doesn't think, oh, let me go jump into fire, Krishna will save me, because that is taking service from Krishna. One doesn't think to disturb Krishna, oh, now he has to come and protect me. Of course, Krishna doesn't see it as that, but the devotee's consciousness is so pure and so fixated on Krishna's happiness that they do nothing to bring any undue work. So one in Krishna consciousness takes the intelligence to protect themselves. To protect. But they know the protection is coming from Krishna. So they don't act foolishly or blindly. They'll wear seatbelt in the car. They'll take medications if their body is sick. They'll follow the social distancing requirements to a T. They'll follow these things. Because one knows, yes, there's a real situation. Being aloof from the material world doesn't mean that, okay, now I'll independent, I won't get this virus. No. And the devotee knows, if I get this virus, my ability to serve Krishna will be curtailed. So yes, I'll be cautious and careful, but I'll not be fearful. Because if I get it, then okay, that's Krishna's plan. If I did the reasonable attempts to protect me, and was intelligent, then if I get it, okay, that's Krishna's plan. He must have a better plan for me, right? So yes, we follow these very strictly, very sincerely,
Yeah.
and but we do it for the purpose of not, thinking beyond our Krishna consciousness. So one doesn't give undue trouble to Krishna by bringing ourselves in harm's way, right? So it's a nice clarification question, because one can take what you said and just, as you said, oh, I don't care, Krishna, no, that's not what Krishna recommends. He's always saying, use your intelligence.
Yeah, it is actually kind of touched like 433 said the sacrifice done in the knowledge, not in the ignorance.
Yeah.
That actually it should be very clear to the people who follow the faith systems.
Yeah. Prabhupada followed. If you observe his example, he followed the rules. Though he knew they were rules made by demons,
Yeah.
he still followed them. He followed the laws. He would not cut any corners. Right? He was very strict, saying we must be good members of society. That will inspire people to come to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
But we should know these laws actually will not bring about peace and happiness. Krishna's laws ultimately will.
Okay.
Right? So we have to understand them in context of each other. Otherwise we become fanatical.
Yeah, it is distracting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you,
Thank
Mati.
you. Very
Nice.
nice class, Prabhu. Yeah, always nectarian class,
Yeah,
and optimize the data, optimize the description, discourse, not less, not more, perfectly suitable for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your blessings.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna,
It's
Prabhuji.
excellent. This is Sarvashishra Gopal. Prabhuji, we talked about doing our best and leaving the results to Krishna. Whether it's a success or failure, work is our department, results is Krishna's department, right? So, just wanting to know, should a devotee introspect, irrespective of the success or failure, about of what has happened and what has been outcome, to learn more or to serve Krishna better, kind of?
Yeah, no, it's a nice question, because we don't see, when we detach from the results, if we don't detach from the results with intelligence, what happens is we can become lazy, we can become what we call undisciplined, we can become uncaring, right? So when we render service, we do look at what happened, what didn't happen, and we can analyze, did I do everything I could have done? Did I render my service as nicely as I could? I was cooking chapatis, and did they burn because I was inattentive? Okay, I better become more attentive. Or I was doing this, and did the program not go as well as it could? But the purpose of looking at success should be, again, centered squarely on Krishna's pleasure. But often what happens, due to the presence of false ego, we are looking for success, our own success, also in devotional service. It happens. Right? So we want to continue to center on Krishna's success. And we look to see, yes, how I can better serve Krishna. But then when the results don't come, we understand, okay, that's Krishna's plan. So we don't become stressed. We don't become upset or frustrated in that endeavor also. So if we look back and think, I really did everything I could, and still it didn't work, okay, that must be Krishna's plan. So we have to be objective both ways. We don't become frustrated and animated and disappointed. The only disappointment we should have is, did I not give 110%? Krishna has given me this ability, this body, this intelligence, this, all the different tools. Did I use them, the gifts of Krishna, as best as possible? When we raise our children, we always tell them, don't waste the gifts you have. So we as children of Krishna should not waste the gifts he has given us. So use them absolutely to the best of ability. Analyze, did I do it as well as I could have? Was I, being lazy? Was my intelligence proper? Did I not think this properly? No, we should do some introspection. But then know, though, that Krishna will ultimately determine success and failure. And our analysis should be on the input, not the output. Does that make sense, Prabhu? Or is there a follow-up maybe to that?
No, that's good, Prabhu. That's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a nice. It's both. All these questions are very good because you're getting to the nuances of the practical application, so that we don't misapply in practice, because there's always potential for that. To kind of misapply in practice some of these principles. So we want to be dissecting, and when after we have a festival, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, how we can improve it. Those are all good things to have for the pleasure of Krishna, not for our own, sense of accomplishment. Any other comments or questions?
Hey Krishna Prabhu, thank you for again always such a wonderful class and breaking down all these complex, topics very nicely. So always thank you very much. On verse number 23, how can we distinct merging entirely into transcendence without the Mayavad twist?
Yeah. So the what's merging into transcendence is our consciousness. So remember what transcendence means. So when we say transcendental knowledge, to transcend means to go above or beyond. So go above and beyond what? So we have the inferior material nature, and we have the superior spiritual nature. Apara and para shakti. Krishna will explain in the 7th chapter. So when we say transcend, we are transcending the apara shakti, the material energy, and rising above into the spiritual energy. But that is not merging into Krishna. We are entering into the realm of Krishna. And now we're engaging in devotional service. So, think about the idea of I walk into a home. I'm walking into the home. I'm not merging into the home. I maintain my individuality within that home. And then there I perform different activities. The Mayavad philosophy is I want to merge into the energy of that house. Whereas the devotee says, I want to enter into the house. So enter into the house of what? The spiritual house, the house of Krishna. Okay? So that is the distinction. So when Krishna is saying here, merge into transcendence, it is, I want to become fully enter into the spiritual consciousness, the transcendental consciousness. But my individuality, my existence remains so that I can render service. Why does a devotee want to be individual and personal? Because in that way they can render service to Krishna. And that is what is most pleasing. Is that okay?
Perfect. Very nice, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments? Okay, there's a question online.
Kaushik Prabhu is asking, before there was no question about God, but after getting into Krishna consciousness, why is there lots of questions and doubts?
Well, sometimes we say ignorance is bliss, right? But that's actually false. Ignorance is misery because it leads to so many difficult situations. But yes, as we start to, look under the hood, it's like you're driving a car. You don't really know that there's pistons and there's a cylinder and there's spark plugs and there's wire. You just get in and drive. But as soon as you open the hood, you realize, wow, there's all this complex machinery. Right? So in spiritual life, as we begin to inquire, it's natural that we start to get more questions, right? We answer one and 2 more questions come because we're digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's what Krishna is actually recommending. And what is Arjuna doing? He asks some questions and then he gets some answers. And then what does he do? He asks more questions. And then he gets some more answers. And then he repeats the question. And then he asks more. That's the Vedic process. So it is natural that as we learn more and more, it inspires some new questions. Yeah, these questions weren't there previously because we weren't even thinking. We are just running 100 miles an hour, not thinking where I'm going. Now that I'm trying to think what is best for me, how I can achieve this, these questions naturally arise, and we should ask those questions and exhaust those doubts so they don't haunt us, and that we can make progress. And that's what we see in the example, throughout Shastra, this question, answer. And that's why Krishna in the next verse is going to say, inquire. He doesn't say just serve, he says inquire. Any other comments or questions?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanva Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
I just was wondering, Krishna is talking all about all these different kinds of sacrifices, Prabhuji. So that's the reason why, maybe just to clear our doubts that this is not the right way to go, and clearing all these options to us, describing pranayam and then mystic yoga, all these things, every time mentioning to us for our purification that this is not the path that you need to take, but if you are still taking it, eventually your goal is bhakti. Is that the reason?
Yeah, you can think like, let's say, I'm trying to think of an example. I'll just think of something mundane that, a chef is coming and he's showing you all the preparations he has made. And he says, these are the best ones. Now we'll go eat those. But if we're looking across and say, what about those? What about those? What about those? If I don't know about them, I may wonder, is this better? So Krishna is giving all the different options. And then says, Yogi Namapi Sarvesha Mudgate Nantaratma Shaddaban Bhajateyo Mansame Yuktagamata. All these yogis, processes, they're there. But the best and highest is bhakti. If he just spoke about bhakti, we may wonder, did he forget to speak about karma kanda? Did he forget to speak about dhyana yoga? Did he forget to speak about jnana yoga? Right? So, to clear, he gives all the options. These are all the things you can do. Now, this is what is best, and here is why. That is a complete instruction. Right? So that's why Krishna is presenting all of these, and then saying conclusively what is best. Because otherwise we would have some doubts.
Yeah, Prabhuji, thank you so much. And a wonderful lecture, as usual. Hare Krishna.
Thank you all for your blessings. We can continue in this journey together. Anything else? Okay. So if not, thank you very much. So next week we'll conclude chapter 4 and then move into chapter 5. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.